Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what I will present today, I will start first with a general overview of the feature of the manuscript as a whole. But again, this is something you can find in the manuscript, in the catalog. So I'll be quite quick about it. And then we're going to move to the presentation of the section that comprises historiographical excerpts, and we're going to analyze and see the general features. Since the text there are mainly unedited or unattested elsewhere, I'll try to show you as much text as I can and as it's bearable. And my aim today is to show, as Emiliano started saying, that excerpt collection is not something, that are just, it's an active practice. And my aim today is to show that there is an editorial mind, an intent, a purpose behind this collection. And this is something we already started seeing in last FLOS paper with Alberto Camplani. Professor Camplani also start talking about titles and show us that in manuscript, titles are not only things that gives bibliographical information. They're not tied to a single word, but they are organizers of knowledge. And this is something we'll pay some attention to today as well. I will also try to show you a loca parallela to see whether some excerpts are extant elsewhere, just to give you an idea that there was more available in Syriac. So our compiler made a selection with a specific intent. But enough with the talk, let's move to the presentation. Manuscript Dayr al-Suryan 28, number 2 in Murad Kamil's catalog, is a composite manuscript made of 6 codicological units that were not originally belonging together. The first one is a single folio. The second one is, they are called A, B, C, etc. in the catalog, of course. So the second one is our focus today and dates to the 6th or 7th century. Then we have a manuscript B to the 8th century, C to 8074, D to the 8th century, and finally manuscript E. What do they contain? The first one is a single folio with 2 owner's note, it belonging to an unidentified manuscript. And the notes, the first one is identical to one that we can find in another British Library manuscript, 17141. And another one, the second one is a note for Deir al-Surian. Then we have manuscript B with 4 philosophical treatises. The first one is Acephalus, and the folia had been cut to fit the dimension of manuscript A. Then we have manuscript C, single folio. On the recto, we have an excerpt, we have a passage from Dionysius, hallowed by the name. And on the verso, we have a page with a drawing of a circle within a square with a cross. But again, you can find all this information in the catalog. Then manuscript D, 11 folio, that contain 9 sections from the Holy Father. And to this manuscript was added something that looks like a Coptic list of name. And finally, a single folio coming from a liturgical manuscript, but it's badly damaged, cut to fit again the dimension of A, so not much can be said about it. So we can see that these manuscripts were not belonging together, they're very different, and so we can just focus on manuscript A. Before starting, I like to quote a passage from the catalog. It's talking about manuscript A, and it says, the manuscript requires much further study as it reflects the theological, social, and intellectual climate of the Syriac Orthodox community in its formative period. In addition to this historical interest, the manuscript also provides a huge number of texts, many of which are attested here for the first time or cannot be found elsewhere in Syriac. So you can already see what are the main issues or the main feature of this manuscript. It was composed in a period in which the Syriac Orthodox Church was forming its identity. It has a lot of passages. Most of them are unattested elsewhere or unedited, and it's rich in content. So keeping that in mind, we can start with section A that has the title Volumes of Admonition and Demonstration of the Holy Fathers, which are very much needed. You can find the title, the Syriac title here. It's a manuscript dating to the 6th or 7th century. You can find a picture that is taken, of course, from the catalog. It is a big collection of historical, biblical, and canonical passages. It's written, as you can see, in 2 columns in an elegant strangula, and it's provide witnesses supporting Syriac Orthodox doctrines. The manuscript is composed of 16 quires, They are not numbered, not all of them, but at least the first 13 have a shorter version of the title. You can see again it in the picture that says Treatise of Admonition of the Holy Father and this small title is in the upper margin of the middle and following folio, as you can see here. The manuscript has 29 sections that are numbered not in the manuscript, but in the catalog. And the sections are very clearly divided because they have like red borders and decorative lines. So there's a clear division into 29 sections. We have 3 owner's notes, like 3, scribal notes. 2 are the same, even if the second one corrects the first one a bit, but anyway, they are probably probationes calami. And the third one is a praise of this disciple of Shenute, the archimandrite of the White Monastery. And all these 3 notes are on folio 2. As I said, the manuscript has 29 sections, and 6 of these sections contain historiographical excerpts. We have excerpt in section 1 from Socrates, in section 10 from Eusebius, and then we have section 18 and 19 that are entirely made from excerpt from Theodoret, and section 21 entirely made of excerpt from Flavius Josephus, and finally section 22. I have put here also amongst brackets the history of Onesima, that is the last section of the catalog, but I will not talk about it today. Why so? This is technically not an historiographical excerpt because it is a life and it's not an excerpt. It's incomplete, but just because we have the final folio missing. However, in our case and in other also, I think that this division doesn't make a lot of sense. If we look at, as we will, if we look at the, for instance, at section 18 and 19, we will see that they are mostly made of example of lives. They provide witnesses of how should an Orthodox behave, or example of virtuous man. So the content is pretty much the same. The aim is pretty much the same because they are there to give you examples. They are often in same manuscripts. So I think that in this case, the division amongst historiography and life is quite artificial. However, we will not have enough time to talk about it today, so I will not address it, but I just wanted to mention that there's this section as well. Some of you finally might have noticed that the number of folia that I'm showing here, can you see my cursor? Okay, the number of folia that I'm showing here is slightly different from the one in the catalog, because from this section at least, there has been a slight little mistake in the catalog. So everything it says to be 2 folia after than it actually is. So in the catalog, you'll find, for instance, this section starting from folio 114, while actually it's 12. But that's just a small note for those of you who have the catalogs next to them. So let's get started, shall we? Section number 1, as an excerpt from Socrates, it has its own title. It says that an Orthodox should not pray in a temple of the heretics, nor in any place they possess, and not be or pray, as Varompa translates, with them whenever in any way. Accordingly, this section has 20 passages supporting this statement. They are taken from canons, Severus, Basil, and so on. Our historiographical excerpt has the same purpose. It is in folio 3, and it is a small excerpt from Socrates' Ecclesiastical History, Book 1, Chapter 6, paragraph 29. I'm quickly going to read it. It is in fact good for you who are Christians that you avert your faces from the heretics, like from opponents of gods and corrupter of their souls, and you shall not even shake hands with them, so that you will not even have part in their sins, as ordered the blessed John. From the second letter of John the Evangelist, everyone who transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ, God is not in him. I skip some passage. If a man comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him in your house and do not greet him. He, in fact, who greets him, become partaker of his evil deeds. So what do we have here? We have first a small passage from Socrates. Then Socrates mentions John, and then our compiler, or a compiler, put a quotation from John, the same quotation. So we have first a statement from an ecclesiastical history saying that we should not partake in anything with the heretics. And this statement is further stressed with a quotation from John. Keep in mind this quotation from John, because the very same one is going to come again in the last section of our manuscript. Instead, the quotation from Socrates is also extant in another manuscript, Vaticanus Syriacus 145, dating to the 9th, 10th century. You will quickly and easily see that the translation from Socrates is the very same. We only have one major difference, and it's the first part that is underlined, because the Vatican manuscript respects the Greek reading. And so as it is in Greek, the Vatican manuscript reads, a virtue faces from all those who speak and think things against Christ, whereas manuscript Deir al-Surian only has heretics. So it's like our manuscript used, instead of a periphrasis, one single word that was straight to the point and that was fitting the general aim of the section and the general content of the section. Of course, the final part of the Vaticanus is different from our manuscript, but that's because the Vatican continues with the translation of the chapter, whereas our manuscript, as we said, just put the quotation from John. And I also forgot to mention that in the Vaticanus, the chapter is more extensive, because in the al-Surian we only have paragraph 29, whereas in the Vaticanus we have paragraph 1 to 30. So there was more at a certain point available in Syriac, and we have a very small passage in our manuscript. I pretty much addressed everything in this slide. You can see here the reading from Greek, and I only like to further stress again that there was more available there, and our manuscript, our compiler made a selection and further supported this quotation from a passage from John. Let's move to the next section. That is actually my favorite one. Section 10, it doesn't have a specific title, but it's centered on the importance of having a sinless soul at the moment of death. And then it has passage from John, from Basil, from Methodius, and from Evagrius, and a quotation from the 6th book of Eusebius' Ecclesiastical History. Before addressing this quotation, I'd like to spend some words on the translation of Eusebius' Ecclesiastical History into Syriac, because the work was translated in its entirety, probably at the end of the 4th or the beginning of the 5th century, from Greek into Syriac. We now have 2 manuscripts that preserve this translation, and they're called A and B in the Syriac edition that was made by Wright and MacLean. However, manuscript A has a big lacuna after folio 84, so books 5 and 7 are incomplete, and book 6 is missing altogether. Whereas manuscript B only has book 1 to 5, with an exception of like the first 3 chapters of book 1 are missing. So we can see that none of the complete, so to say, of the more extensive manuscript have book 6. We have some excerpt from book 6 in another British Library manuscript, 14620, but this manuscript only has excerpt from chapters 16, 17, and 25. So again, our Deir al-Surian manuscript is the sole Syriac witness of book 6, chapter 44. So what is in this chapter? Here you have the complete excerpt, the whole chapter. It is the translation, the Syriac translation is almost complete. There's only the first paragraph, Greek paragraph, that is missing, but that's because in Greek it is it's introductory to the chapter itself, and we can see that it is recapped and reworked in the title a bit. This is a letter from Dionysius of Alexandria to Fabius of Antioch that addressed the issue of Novatian, because as you know, Novatian was against the forgiveness of the lapsi, so of the people who sacrificed, whereas Dionysius, as you can see in the first gray highlighted part, instead he promoted the forgiveness of them, because if they ask, I'm reading now, if they ask, and especially if they supplicated before, they shall be absolved, so that they depart from this word with good hope. So that's the general content of the chapter, and it provides an example of a pious man called Serapion, who was an old believer, but in the time of the persecution of teachers in Alexandria, he sacrificed. So he then repented, he asked for forgiveness, but in vain, until one day he fell sick. And for 3 days, he cannot walk, he cannot talk. On the fourth day, he gains some strength, so he asked to call a presbyter. His grandson goes, but it's night, the presbyter cannot go, so he gives to the child the Eucharist. The child goes back to his grandfather, and the moment Serapion received the Eucharist, he dies. And you can see the final comment, it is clear that it was kept alive only because it shall be absolved. Now, as I said, this chapter is not attested elsewhere in Syriac. However, it is attested in Armenian. Now, the Armenian translation of Ecclesiastical History of Eusebius is a complete one that was made at the beginning of the 5th century on the basis of Syriac. So it was not translated from Greek to Armenian, but from Syriac to Armenian. Now, why is this compelling? Because in two cases in which the Syriac is different from Greek, the Armenian follows the Syriac text. So I think that this is a strong hint that says us that the excerpt in Dayr al-Suryan actually goes to the same complete translation that was used to translate the work into Armenian, the same complete translation that now it witnessed only in manuscript A and B. I've reported here the two cases, and I thank Andy Ilkens for double checking the Armenian for me and translating it also. And so in the first case, you can see that the Syriac and the Armenian do not have the first part, I beg, hasten, and absolve me quickly, while in the second case, in Greek, it's Serapion that says that the presbyter could not come, whereas in Syriac and in Armenian is the grandson, the child that says to him that the priest was not available to come. So we have a small difference there. Well, actually, the second case is a different interpretation. We have one sentence more, and in both cases, Armenian follows Syriac. Why am I stressing this much? Because Lucas van Rompuy examined the feature of the language of the Syriac translation of Eusebius and noticed that it's quite different in some respect from the classical Syriac, but it's close to the language of the Old Syriac Gospel. Now, none of the recorded peculiarities highlighted by van Rompuy are in our manuscript. However, A and B, so the two complete manuscripts, are not always consistent, and Deir al-Surian, the excerpt in Deir al-Surian is very short. And more importantly, the translation seems to be of the same kind, so a translation verbo e verbo. I've put here some examples, but it would probably be too long to discuss them all. I would just like to stress again that the fact that the kind of translation is the same, both in A and B and in Deir al-Surian, and the two cases of Armenian makes me think that our excerpt in Deir al-Surian goes back to the complete translation into Syriac that is now not extant in A and B only due to material accident. That's enough for it. Quickly go to the third section that is entirely made of excerpt from Theodoret, and it says, the title says, Theodoret, who shows in how many ways the heretic inflicted torments to the Orthodox. So this section shows in detail a lot of examples from Theodoret that shows that the impious people or the non-believer tormented and tortured the true believer, but they endured everything, and at the end, the impious ones were punished. Here you have an overview of all the cases that are in this section. I will not gonna show you all of them because as you see, it's quite long, but I'm gonna highlight a couple of general features before showing you one or two examples. First, quick notice, once again, my overview is a bit different from the one in the catalog because our excerpt 3 and 10 are not recorded in the catalog, but that's just a small note. As to the content, what can we say? You can see that cases 1, 2, and 3, there's a difference between the Syriac and the actual Greek chapter division, because chapter 1, it says to be taken from book 3, chapter 6. Except 2 is taken, the Syriac says from chapter 13, but actually it starts with 12 and goes on with 13. And finally, excerpt 3, the Syriac says it's from chapter 17, well, actually it starts with 16 and goes on with 17. This can simply mirror a different division in the Greek chapters, like in chapters in Syriac. However, I'd like to remind you that the chapter division in Greek is an ancient one. Parmentier also said that it could go back to Theodoret himself. So it's not a big deal, but it's something that is probably worth noticing also because for the rest, chapter division is the same in Syriac and in Greek. What else is important to notice? In 3 cases, we can actually see that there was a selection of passages. I'm talking about excerpt 6, excerpt 9, and excerpt 11. There is some material that is skipped, and this selection is made clear by the Bodar Khalil or similar sentences. Those excerpts, I'm just going to give you an example from this one, from the 6th one, because this is chapter in Greek on the people of Samosata that shows how pious they were, and both in Syriac and Greek, it starts saying that Arius appointed an Arian bishop, so the citizen just stopped going to church. Then Greek says, but actually this man was all alone, but he had a mild nature, a moderate nature. This is not in Syriac. It's 2 sentences, very small lines skipped in Syriac. Then both goes on, Syriac and Greek, with examples of how the people of Samosata were against this bishop. For instance, there was his bishop took a bath and all the people refuses to take the bath in the same water because they thought that the water was polluted with heresy. So they go on with in the same way until Greek makes another example for another bishop. And he said, but this bishop is an Arian one. Actually, he had a different nature from the previous one. So he expelled some of his opponents. He was stronger, etc. This is skipped again in Syriac. It's a small one, but it's skipped. And then they both goes on with the narration of what the pious people of Samosata did. So we can see that actually the skipped part are small sentences, just few lines. So they're not skipped because the compiler want to save space. They're skipped because the focus there is on the unorthodox bishop. And that was not important for the Syriac. It was not its aim. Having also one sentence that could sound like he was praising this unorthodox bishop. So we can clearly see here how the excerpting practice worked. I can give you a lot of other examples. For instance, just this one, chapter 7, it's about the time in which Valens in Edessa decided that he appointed another heretical bishop. So people start fleeing from the city and Valens put soldiers to stop them until they see a woman goes towards the soldiers with her baby and they ask her, why are you doing so? And she replies, because I wanna die for my faith. I wanna join my people and die for my faith. And then they ask her, okay, but why do we have your child? And she says, so that he can share with me this glorious death. And then Greek goes on saying, seeing this thing, Valens called the persecution off because it would have been just a vain massacre. This is not in Syriac. The Syriac stops when the woman says, my child needs to share the same death that I will. The actual fact that then they don't die is not there because it's not important. Anyway, let's move to another point. As you can see in the last column, we have some excerpts that are witnessed in 2 other manuscripts. One is British Library 17147, and this is a 8th, 9th century manuscript with excerpt from Gregory of Nazianzus. And the other one is another British Library 14725, again with excerpt from Gregory. In the first case, so excerpt 1, they both have the same translation, but our manuscript is more extensive. In this case here, in the 8th case, the British Library manuscript goes on with the section that is absent in our manuscript. So it continues where our manuscript stops. And finally, in 11, British Library has the last section that is also in our manuscript, the last sentence that is also in our manuscript, and then goes on with the rest of the chapter. So in all cases, you can see that they have, when they shared, the same translation, but there was also more available. So again, another proof that there was a selection in our manuscript. In this case, in case of the other Syriac manuscript, they have the same translation again, but our manuscript is more extensive. Let's turn now to a couple of examples. I'm going to skip this one due to time constraint and move to this one. I've put the Greek text because I wanted to show you that the style of the Syriac translation. The Syriac translation is very close to Greek, but it has room for innovation, for liberties. More importantly, the Syriac translation stress some elements and skip some others. So now I'm going to read the translation from Syriac, but if you want, feel free, and you can, of course, feel free to follow from Greek and you will see how faithful the translation is. So the excerpt that is from book 3, chapter 12-13 says, thus with Julian, the prefect of the East, entered inside the church Felix, the official of the imperial treasure, and Elpidius, who was entrusted of the administration of the possession of the emperor. And Greek says that the Roman call accordingly to use count of the private affair. Not important for a Syriac translation, it's not in Syriac. Then they both go on saying, it is also said that Felix and Elpidius were Christians and abandoned piety looking for the favor of the impious emperor. However, and now I read from Syriac, however, Julian stood on the side of the altar and without fear uncovered his privy parts and secreted urine on it. What does the Greek says? The Greek only says, and Julian secreted urine on the sacred altar and slapped Elpidius who tried to impede it. So what do we have in Syriac? We have at the same time an expansion and an omission, because it's stressed, the impious act is stretched. It shows Julian that uncovers himself and then urinates on the altar. And it doesn't say that it slaps Elpidius. So it's interesting because we have both an expansion and an extension. We don't know. I checked, of course, the Greek and there's no variant there. So it's just something peculiar of Syriac. Then the book goes on saying how they were punished for that and a lot of disgusting details that I'm gonna spare you. So what we can see, selection, faithful translation with space of innovation, general feature of the sections being witnesses of martyrdoms and of faith acts and how impious people will be punished. We will find the same features in the next section. Again, entirely made of excerpt from Theodoret. In this case, however, they are taken from book 5, whereas in the previous section, they were from book 3 and 4. The sections are two separate ones. They are separate by borders. There's a shalem, so there's the end before the other, but there's a continuity in content and in style and in everything. So, and here is where I go back to the title issue. The fact that we have different sections might hint to the fact that they go back to different collections. I'm suggesting it as an hypothesis because that's the only reason why these two sections should be divided. It's because they maybe come from different collections. Of course, I'm not saying they go back to different translations. In this case as well, we have another excerpt that is extant elsewhere, namely again in the Vatican manuscript. And in this case, again, they both have the same translation from Theodoret. So when we see that we have different manuscripts that all have the same translation of different passages, of course, but they all have the same translation. To me, it hints at the fact that they go back to the same translation. I'm not saying it was a complete translation of the work. I'm not saying it was I don't know how much of the text was translated, but I think it was only translated once and it's circulated in different collections. And this might be hinted at by these divisions. Again, I don't have a definitive argument to prove so I'm just suggesting it. I'm hoping to have your feedback on that. But I think that this might hint at the fact that they go back to different collections. I'm gonna be quite quick about it because we already saw all the features in the previous section. Again, we have the last excerpt is divided. There's passage skipped. Again, we have a correspondence in the other manuscript. Same argument, same themes is martyrdoms, witnesses of faith, pious life, impious people are punished. So similarities in style, in structure, in content. I prefer moving to the next section that will actually give us something new and leave this section here with an open question. I'm sorry, I'm not able to give you a specific answer, but I'm just still working on that. Next section, I'm gonna be quite quick about it as well, because the complete excerpts are in the catalog, and also because Lucan Varompai wrote an article on that, and it's in the next slide. So I've got very little to add to it. What do we have here? Excerpt from Flavius Josephus from book 3 and 7. You can see that they are not in order. Jewish war in Syriac, and here's the article from Lucas Varompai. Jewish war in Syriac is extant in 2 manuscripts, the Milan Bible and another manuscript of Dayr al-Surian, and they both have book 6 of the Jewish war. And they both seem to represent the same translation of book 6. Varompai here took on an argument of Haman, the editor of Sergius the Stylite against the Jews. And both Haman and Varompai said that the work of Sergius hints at the fact that there was more than only book 6 translated into Syriac, because Sergius has quotation from book 1, 3, 5, and 7. Now, what's important in the article of Varompai is that he uses our excerpt in Deir al-Surian to further stress this argument. Here you have the complete section, that's all the text that is in the section, and again, the complete text is in the catalog as well. The excerpt I'm talking about is, well, Varompai is talking about is this one here. I hope you can see my cursor. So from the 3rd Mimra, and Josepho offered prayed to God and said, yada, yada. Why is this important? Because in Greek, this passage is quite a difficult one. There are different readings. So the Syriac translator seems to have been unable to properly understand it, whatever text it might was looking at. So the Syriac translation, it's quite unique in its own. And the striking fact is that both Deir al-Surian and Sergius have the same translation. So Varompai says, this might hint at the fact that they both go back to the same pre-existing translation that must have been a full or fuller than book 6 translation of the work. What can we add to that? Again, the general content of the section is quite close to the one of the others. First, it's a passage against suicide, and then after a passage that shows that people will be punished for the impious act. But again, you have everything in the catalog and in the article, so I just moved to the last section. Final section, no specific title except from John Chrysostom and letters of Isidore, and one passage of Theodoret. This passage, I'm showing it, that's the complete passage. In the catalog, it says to be unidentified, and actually, as such, is not extant elsewhere, because this is a combination of a small passage from Theodoret Ecclesiastical History, book 4, chapter 9, paragraph 4, with a quotation, let's say, from Ignatius' letter to the Smyrnians 6:4:1, and again to John 10:11. So let's read the passage. Those, in fact, who do not proclaim on nature of the Holy Trinity shall be excommunicated, and whoever is seen partaking with them shall be excommunicated. And the holy Ignatius said, if possible, they should not even meet them. And John the Evangelist in his letter says so. Whoever comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him in your house and do not greet him. He, in fact, who greets him becomes partaker of his injustice. So what do we see here? Once again, a very small passage from Theodoret Ecclesiastical History that is in content very close to the excerpt of Socrates that we saw in our first section. Again, what they're saying is, do not partake in anything with heretics. And then here, there is a quotation, a small quotation from Ignatius, and again, the same passage from John. Here is a comparison of the two sections of the passage of John, You can see easily that the beginning is a bit different, and the ending is different. But for the rest, the quotation is the same. Because section 1, so the one that was combined with Socrates, said, becomes partaker of his evil deeds, while this section is becomes partaker of his injustice. Now, I don't know who put together these three excerpts. I don't know if our compiler found it already somewhere else, or if he did it, there's unfortunately no way I can tell it. We have two different options, I think. The first one is that in both cases, it was him who put the quotation of John and of Ignatius. And in a way, it makes sense because we have a similar idea. So do not partake with heretics, and a quotation from the same quotation from John that supports this statement. But how do we explain in this case the different endings? So maybe this was already done somewhere else. I don't know yet. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your suggestion about it. So I'm leaving this question open. I just hinting at the fact that there are these similarities. And I think, in a way, it's also obvious that for the same idea, the same passage from John is quoted, but at the same time, it's also striking. The same passage is twice in the same manuscript, which is not unparalleled, I think, but it's still worth noticing, I guess. So I'll leave this question open and quickly jump to the conclusions. What we saw today of this manuscript and what can we further say? Well, there's much more to be done on this manuscript. Of course, we need to study this manuscript as a whole. So how do these historiographical excerpts work with the rest of the passages that is there? So we need a study of the manuscript as a whole, and that's a big desiderata. But also we can still already see which were the most burning questions for the Syrian Orthodox Church in that period. They were stressing how important it was not to partake with other confessions and never to change your mind. Just keep fighting for your faith, even if people are fighting against you. What else did we see? This manuscript is the sole testimony for Eusebius 644. And this manuscript also gives us a lively picture of the originality of excerpting practices. We saw how often passages were skipped, combined with others, how the translation was different. Of course, I cannot say all the time if the difference in translations are due to some liberties of the first translator of our compiler. The only way I can tell it is when I have the same passage attested elsewhere. Then we can have a comparison of what is unique in the manuscripts. But again, this is quite a lively picture of this originality. And finally, this manuscript can be used to further study the history of transmission of Socrates and Theodoret in Syriac, because we saw the two different sections with different passages from different books of Theodoret, and we started thinking that it might be hint that they come from different translations. So this is really an important manuscript that has a lot to offer. And with that, I will conclude here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Giorgia. That was terrific in many regards. for the material, the fresh and interesting material you gave us to think about, for the exploration of the, well, the possibility to peek into the laboratory, so the workshop of the compilers. And yes, for the many questions that you asked, more than answers that you gave. So that's very positive. And I'd have already a lot of questions, but I open the floor to questions to the audience first. So thank you very much. Please. Luc van Rompuy.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Giorgia, for this excellent presentation. I'm so happy that you were able to go to Egypt and to see the manuscript, because that's, of course, the only way we can progress in our field. And I very much hope that the manuscripts will be available soon in a digital form, but as long as that's not the case, the only way is to go to Egypt. I very much like the number of things you discussed, especially your insistence on the agency of the compiler. So this collection becomes like a very deliberate work. And so you showed how the compiler is not only making his selections, but also like manipulating them, changing them here and there, skipping what is less relevant to him. So I think that's a very important part. What I understood from you, and means I don't know, and I struggled with this question myself, it looks to me as if the compiler, of course, we don't know, we have this one manuscript, what is behind it and what did he bring together, which already existed. But it's basically a compilation of texts existing in Syriac already. Is that also your impression?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'll start with this question and then go back to the other things that you said. So thank you very much. I think it is putting together something that it was already there, already translated. Of course, I can only speak for the part that I saw, because there is much more in this manuscript. There are a lot of passages, also a lot of still unidentified works there in the manuscript. But for the historiographical excerpts, I think definitely the compiler or compilers were drawing on material that were already there. Yes, and that's actually also kind of the only way I can explain when a passage is extant somewhere else, and is the very same passage with the very same translation. For instance, the cases of the manuscript with the commentary of Grigori. And I thank you very much, Jonathan Loopstra, who gave me pictures of those manuscripts. They have at the same time the same passages, but also completely different passages with the same translation when they share material. So they are not dependent one on the other. So they must go back to a single, or I mean, a single translation in multiple collections. I don't know how this translation circulated, but to me, it's quite, there are too many hints at the fact that it was just one translation. If each and every manuscript I saw having this excerpt, when they share some passage, they share the same translation, I can only think it's just one. And as to the actually going there, yes, that's still the only way. And again, I thank you very much, Alice Kroc, who made this possible for me to actually go there. And we really hope that more will be soon available, because again, there's so much to do there.
I have two small follow-up questions, if that's okay.
Yes, of course, please.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said about artificial boundaries between historiography and anything else. And of course, for you illustrated it with the history of Onesima at the very end, which puzzled me as much as it did you. At the same time, there are, of course, other stories, other passages which raise the same question, like, for example, the prayer of Manasseh. What is it doing there? Is it also seen as some witness from history? So, of course, I fully understand your focus on historiography, but we have to realize that these boundaries are very artificial. And finally, at the very beginning, you mentioned that it's about, among other things, it's about the doctrine of the Syriac Orthodox Church. But there is very little doctrine in it, isn't it? And I wonder whether it's more about discipline, about examples of virtuous life and of correct behavior. That seems more the case than doctrine. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So thank you very much. I'll start from the first question or remark. I completely agree. That's an artificial division, and we cannot artificially separate this kind of content. They just fit the same purpose and they're put together. So there must be a reason there. I needed to make a choice because I didn't have enough time. So I just artificially separated them. But of course, I also took the history. I also transcribed the history of Onesimus because it's just too relevant to be ignored.
Yeah.
As to the second question, I completely agree. When it comes to the historiographical excerpt there, it's not about doctrine. They never, ever discuss doctrine. But I would say that could be because they're quoting from Greek historiographical, like ecclesiastical histories. As far as I know, but please correct me if I'm wrong, doctrine is not that very much discussed there. When we think about Socrates, Eusebius, and Theodoret, they don't go deep in details. Of course, they wrote the creeds and they discussed about councils and decisions, etc. But the big controversies are not that highlighted. So when I said that it's also about doctrine, I'm also thinking about the rest of the collection. It's absolutely right. Then when it comes to historiographical excerpt, it's not about doctrine. But I think that in the rest of the collection, it is. For instance, in one of the last final sections of the manuscript, there is a passage that is against the council of, let me double check it again, because I want to be super sure when I say it. There's a passage against the wicked synod of Chalcedon and the Thomas of the wicked Leo. So
yeah. At one point, you may want to look at manuscript 27.
I did.
So you don't have to go back to Egypt for it.
No, I looked at it as well.
Yeah, because there, I think it's slightly different. And there is an interesting aspect, which in fact, we missed not entirely, but Kaufhold, in his review of the catalogue, he drew attention to it. There are these two concepts of medabranuta and chatituta. And chatituta, it's the strictness in applying all kinds of rules. And medabranuta, which was a bit unknown to me, but it's more like flexibility. When do Syriac Orthodox people have to be more flexible and not strictly follow their rules or their beliefs? And I think that adds an interesting dimension, which, as far as I remember, it's not exactly present in 28, but of course it was a burning issue for the Syriac Orthodox in the 6th century when the Chalcedonians were so powerful. To what extent they have to be very strict, and to what extent they could in some way collaborate with the Chalcedonians. But thank you very much. I enjoyed very much your talk, and I look forward to your further work on this very important manuscript, which was the one by far, I spent the most time on it, both in the monastery as later to identify a number of the passages, and we didn't identify all, and I noticed at least one which you identified, which was missed in the catalog. So congratulations, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for this question and answer section. And please, the audience, we have a question from Phil Fornes. Phil, please.
Yes, thank you, Giorgia, so much for this talk. I'm always fascinated to hear more about this manuscript and hope I too someday will get to see it in person. I have two questions. One, I was very interested in your thought about the division of Theodoret's ecclesiastical history between these two sections. And it seems to me somewhat convincing that it could be two separate sources because of the book. Although the section maybe the first section you might have 3 and 4. But then in the next one you have 5, so perhaps there are 2 different sources there. But I was curious whether there's a thematic difference that could also explain this, with no sort of opinion on this myself or knowledge. So that's one question, whether there's also a thematic explanation there. And the second question is, it really stands out to me that the historiographical materials are scattered throughout the manuscript, except for perhaps these 2 with Theodoret. And you even have this quotation of the same Bible passage in the 2 historiographical works, if we exclude the hagiographical one at the end, not to make that distinction. Very opposite ends. Is there any relation, or do you have initial thoughts? I know you said you focused on these works while you were there, on connections that these historiographical works have to the texts that are around them or to the collection as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll start with the first one. Thank you very much for those questions. As far as I saw, there is absolutely no thematical difference between the 2 excerpts of Theodoret, except of course the fact that they are taken from different books. So of course, different books addresses different time periods, so different controversies, but both section 18 and 19 are mainly and entirely devoted of example of martyrdoms, pious lives or pious life, and how impious people were punished. So very much the same themes. And I also started analyzing and comparing the style of translations from the Greek text. And again, same techniques. The fact that, for instance, one Greek verb is translated with 2 Syriac verbs that address a different aspect of the Greek verb, or what else? The same expansion of dark nuances, if I can say so. So pretty much the same. So the division is only based on books. So books 3 and 4 and book 5. As to the thematic, like the connection of this excerpt with the rest of the connection of the passages, yes, there is a strong connection, I think. For instance, I go back to the example of Eusebius. All the other passages that are there stress how important it is to have a sinless soul at the end of your life. So it seems that anytime an historiographical excerpt is quoted, when it is included in a section and it's not entirely devoted to that, is to further stress or to support with other arguments what was said by fathers, the Greek fathers, or all the other witnesses. So there's kind of always the same connection. I need to admit that for the final section, I was unable to have an overview of the section as a whole, the one with the letter of Isidore of Pelusium, because the Syriac numbering of this letter is different from the Greek one. So I couldn't copy them all while I was there, and they're not identified yet. So it was really impossible for me to clearly understand what was in there. So for the final section, I have to admit, I'm not sure of the thematic coherence, but for all the other sections, there is a strong one. For instance, we saw the first one, testimony that you should not partake in anything with the heretics, here you have a passage from the ecclesiastical history that says so. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And if I can follow up very quickly on that.
Of course, Phil. Yeah.
Is it does something explain why a quotation from Theodoret would be at the end of the collection and not next to the others? And why perhaps some of these works weren't grouped together like you have these two sections on Theodoret?
My gut, because that's all I can offer now, is because of different aims. As the final quotation stressed that you should not partake in anything, again, with the heretics, and that is not the aim of the first two sections of Theodoret, because there it's an example of piety, martyrdoms, yada, yada. So it was not fitting there. I mean, it was kind of different. Instead, it was perfectly fitting when you need to stress that, again, do not partake with heretics. So that's my guts. But that's not a definitive answer. There's more to be done again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further questions? You can write them in the chat, of course. Raise your virtual hand. So if not, for the moment at least, I'm taking advantage of the general silence to ask my questions. Well, the first one is not exactly a question, but a short remark on the good demonstration that this Dayr al-Surian manuscript provides for the Pasquali principle, recensores non deteriores, in a sense, because it seems that wherever fragments, excerpts, historiographical excerpts are also tested in other manuscripts, perhaps not wherever, but quite a bit of times here, they are better attested in the later manuscripts. So in Vatican Syriac 145, and in British Library manuscripts, for example, the fragment from Socrates, I took quite an accurate note here. So the Deir al-Suryan 28a attests witnesses to a shortening, right? There is the sort of a substitution of a longer periphrasis with the word heretics. So, and it is in Vatican Syriac 145, it is more adherent to the Greek. It's longer. It even has a commentary. So it seems to be more original, and that's not the only case. There are others that you mentioned. So Deir al-Suryan is attests in a way to a more active intervention of the agency, as Luc van Rompuy said, of the compiler than other collections, apparently. So that's very interesting. So the most recent, or the more recent manuscript has a more original form of the fragment. And another question, which is a real question, very out of curiosity. So you said the section 18 and 19 are separated graphically, right? And the topic of section 18 is quite clear. So it's on the torments that the heretics give to Orthodox, the Orthodox. And what about section 19? Is there a theme? Explicitly stated theme? Which could explain the division?
Thank you very much. I'll start from the first one. You're absolutely right. The Vatican manuscript is it's more faithful in a way to the Greek. It's closer to the Greek, and that's not the only case. But again, I think that that's because they are aiming at different things. Yeah. Vatican Manuscript Library is a big manuscript with a very extensive portions of quotation from Theodoret and Socrates. Of course, also there you can see some time, but that's in a more, that's less frequent. But you can see also in the Vatican one, when the compiler just skips some passages or put things together. But again, to me, also because it's long passages, it's like 80 folia for Theodoret and 30, I think, for the other way around. I think like 80 for Socrates and 30 for Theodoret. So it's very long, it's very faithful to that. So absolutely is a later manuscript, but when you want to know what was translated of Socrates or Theodoret, go look at that manuscript. It's absolutely more, is closer, absolutely, yes. And yes, sometimes also for the ones containing the commentary to Gregory of Nazianzus, but in that case, the quotation are shorter and they are very much intertwined with the commentary of Gregory. So I think that in that case, one would need a completely different approach because you cannot separate and not like take away those excerpts from the commentary. As to the second question, there is a theme, but there is no title. So we saw that the excerpt from Theodoret starts saying, Theodoret, who showed that the non-believers inflicted pain, yada, yada. That's not in the second, in chapter 19. It just starts with, again, from Theodoret, from chapter, blah, blah, blah. But same topics, once again. So
okay, same topics as in the previous section. So in
absolutely, same topics, yes, yes.
So that's quite a conundrum. But well, I cannot give a rational demonstration, but my impression is that these excerpts are not extracted from a complete translation of Theodoret or of Socrates, but they are the fact that they recur more or less in equal form. Well, the changes are even, and one more argument in favor of this throughout different florilegia would seem to point to the existence of an original collection that perhaps was not even in Syriac at the outset, rather than to an accepting work from a whole translation. But I cannot state it with any certainty, because with Eusebius, for example, you have a proof that there was a whole translation. But still, with this recurrence of the same fragments, this is a typical, well, more or less the same, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, with different degrees of agency by the compilers. But this is usually a sign of the existence of a collection rather than of a whole thing.
Thank you very much for that. That's kind of in line with my original feeling about it. I have to admit, I'm like fleeing from this question of whether the works were translated entirely or not. I'm just escaping from that. I don't want to address it because I'll have to. I know. I'm working on it. What I'm doing so far is gathering together all the witnesses. And what I noticed with the material that I have is that, for instance, there's nothing of Socrates from the last two books. It's just not there. At least what I have, there's nothing there. Many reasons to explain that. And I can also see that there are some chapters or book that are privileged and they are like in 2 or 3 witnesses, but others are just in 1 and that's all. So yeah, I think that the expression that was used by Lucas van Rompuy for the Jewish war is quite a nice one, like full or fuller. We don't know. It's more than what we have. It might be complete, might not. But yes, I think anyway that even also I think that it would make it, correct me if I'm wrong, but my feeling is that it would make it quite difficult to quote very specific passages if we have a complete translation of the whole work. I mean, you have to know it very well to go pick it for that one. It may be easier if you're quoting for a different, but again, I don't know. I'm just going with my thoughts right now. It can be completely different. But...
Well, in this case, it would be sufficient that someone very clever, who existed, a lot of clever people existed in the past, so makes it once, and then the others will rely on the first selection. That's quite, that happens, that occurs quite often. So in this case.
Yeah, of course. But that will mean that the one after we're not quoting from the complete translation. Again, so it's there must have been maybe some collections traveling around, but again, I would need
at a certain point at least.
Yes,
they ceased picking from the original work. The question is to know whether they picked in Greek at the origin or whether they picked from a translation. That's quite difficult to assess. I have a further question from Sergei Minov.
Sorry, I got confused. Thank you, Giorgia, for your nice presentation. I have just a small addition following Emiliano's comments about the whole issue of the compiler of your Florilegium, of the use of already existing Syriac translations. And that's the case of the letters of Isidore of Pelusium on edition of the Syriac version of which I'm working. And also Madalina Toka, who is here, I think she discusses that in her dissertation. And here it's an obvious example when the compiler of your Florilegium, he relied upon the existing, we don't know if it was complete translation of Isidore's corpus, but a huge chunk of his corpus was translated and circulated as a complete work. And that's, we know from the most important textual witness of Isidore's letter from British Library, 14731, and several letters of Isidore from your, the last concluding part of your Florilegium, they overlap with this textual witness and they are basically identical. We can see that. So it's clear that the your compiler, he extracted them from this already existing translation of Isidore's letters. I don't know, maybe Madalina want to add something on that, but also regarding this another issue of the later Syriac authors like Sergei the Stylite and others, when we find quotes in earlier patristic translations in them, here they just could be different scenarios playing out. They both could rely upon existing Syriac whole works or upon existing Florilegia or collections of testimonia, like already example of, for instance, I came across one I prepared for Emiliano's volume edition of anti-Jewish collection of testimonia from the 9th century or maybe 8th. I discovered that Dionysius Barsalibi in his anti-Jewish work apparently used this collection of anti-Jewish quotes. So you can see different scenarios playing out. So, but thank you again for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Sergei. That's a very important information to have. And so again, it seems that also in other cases, not only for historiographical excerpt, they were taking from, they or he, I don't know, from an already existing corpus. So thank you very much. I'll look into it. Thank you a lot.
Further questions, interventions? Did someone? Okay, Bishara, please.
Okay, thank you, Giorgia, for your amazing presentation. And I just have a remark about the same quotation that you showed us and the different at the beginning and at the end. Sometimes the compilers of the Florilegia, they follow faithfully their sources, and sometimes they don't note that they quoted the same quotation from two different sources, and they quoted it as they found it in the sources. I just want to mention the same phenomenon in other florilegia, patristic florilegia, dogmatic florilegia, that the same quotation was taken from different sources. I found also the different sources were two different works of Peter of Kalinicum, and it was the same quotation translated into Syriac from the Greek in different ways. And in the same florilegium, they were quoted both the quotations and the compiler or the compilers did not notice this. So sometimes we go to the Greek and we try to look for why they were quoted in different ways, etc. And we forget that maybe they had more than one source, and in these sources, the same quotation was translated in two different ways. So I had this simple remark.
Thank you very much. So in this case, you would rather tend to believe that the quotations in our manuscript come from different sources, even if that makes a lot of sense, of course.
Yes. I think to make a florilegium, it was need for more than one source, and there was need also for an equipe to work on florilegium, and for people who knows very good the tradition, the sources, and etc. And they were like in the monastery. Their life was to work on this. They passed hours and hours to this work. So even without computers and internet, etc. So I think that usually they had in their library more than one source to formulate this kind of florilegia.
Thank you very much. Yeah, of course, it makes a lot of sense also because in one case, the quotation is from Socrates, in the other is from Theodoret. So it can be that for a common theme, they had different collections. Yes, absolutely. That's, of course, one of the possible explanations. Thank you.
Yes, as a follow-up, we have to think that some florilegia are montage, are collages of florilegia. So it happened also it occurred to me as well to find florilegia in which the same fragment is cited twice and it's not exactly worded. It's the same translation evidently, but not worded in exactly with the very same words. So that's probably because it is a result of a collage, very simply, of more than one florilegium or more than one collection. And yes, that can be, in a way, a partial answer to the question as to why sections 18 and 19 are separated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because, well, the compilers were clever people, but perhaps not so clever. Well, that's a stupid remark, but sometimes you come to think that because they just compounded this chunks of florilegia together apparently without noticing that the same fragment was recurring, or if they noted it, they just didn't care because it was useful to have it twice. That's a more reasonable explanation to why they left them more than once in the collection. So that's,
absolutely. Yeah. Also because I think that this is one of the features of our manuscript, that things are stressed a lot. So if something is repeated twice, it's just because they're stressing it. It's
stressing it. They needed it.
Yes,
they didn't care if it was a repetition. That there was no aesthetic concern, and so they left it twice or thrice, even sometimes 3 times.
Also because it's very different parts of the manuscript. One at the beginning and one towards the end. So it's not difficult for me to think that they just wanted to repeat it.
And from a Quellenforschungs point of view, you may explain it with, and I think it's quite reasonable, with different collections, compounded, merged together. Yeah. Are there other questions? So, if not, if it's not the case, so let me thank you once again, Giorgia, for this amazing paper. Thank you very much. It was so interesting and so in line with our, especially in underlining and underscoring the agency of the compiler with our purpose with these FLOS lectures. And so thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending, and we will have a last lecture in this cycle, in this spring-summer cycle, with Matthew Crawford on the 16th of July. He will talk on Cyril of Alexandria against Julian, and the fragments and testimonia from Julian's against the Galileans in the Syriac transmission of Cyril's against Julian. Thank you again, Giorgia. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Grazie mille, Emiliano. Davvero
Sono tutti usciti, sì, siamo solo noi. No, grazie a te.